This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Ex-Detroit Police Chief James Craig might be the most anticipated politician in all of Michigan. In 2021, when he announced himself as a challenger to Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Whitmer mysteriously lost interest in the lockdowns and shutdowns that marked the early pandemic. You could thank James Craig's influence for doing what lawsuits and political pressure could not. But by August 2022, Craig's name did not appear on the Republican ballot in the governor's race. He never got a chance to face Whitmer. After falling victim to a signature collection scandal, Craig was denied his date with destiny. Last year, Craig briefly put his head in the Michigan Senate primary, but his heart and his health were never fully in that race. And now Hollywood Craig is back. He's running for mayor of Detroit, and he's my guest today. Chief, welcome to the Enjoyer Podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, James. What an intro. I appreciate that. And, I got to tell you, because I asked the question all along, and while I felt in my heart and soul that, and clearly, by the way, the polls were showing I was a leading GOP candidate, and then a couple of polls showed me in a dead heat with Whitmer. And I know it's very difficult to unseat an incumbent, but I really got to thank all of Michigan as I traversed the state and just the love and the support I learned so much, and I was actually kind of surprised. I mean, as far away as the UP in northern Michigan, those folks knew who James Craig was. And that meant a lot. And they were eager to have me represent them. They believed in my leadership. And while things didn't work out, and as you pointed out, the signature debacle, but many Michiganders still, they say, you got a raw deal. I would have voted for you. In fact, because I so believed in those who supported me during that campaign, I ended up launching a write-in effort. I mean, it takes a lot of money to do an effective write-in campaign, especially when you're talking about the entire state.
Right. Somebody
Somebody told me, and I haven't verified this, but I got well over 2,000 write-ins. And that's noble compared that, all I had was 2 signs up on the freeway. It's a couple of freeway systems here in Michigan, and some wrote my name in. Certainly not enough to win a race, but I don't have any regrets. I'm grateful that I went through it. And now looking back at that gubernatorial race, less the senatorial, as you pointed out, I had just come off from a hip restructure surgery that really took me out. And I never forget telling the surgeon, James, that I'm planning on launching a run for U.S. Senate. I should be okay. Well, he looked at me as if I had lost my mind. And I said, well, I'm going to be okay because, I had hip surgery 15 years prior.
Right.
And it didn't take me fully out, but this was a restructure. And I was down for over 3 months. And so I had to make a business decision to get out of that race. But as you pointed out, even looking back at that, and I guess I'll take this from Perry Johnson's playbook. He says, I have no interest in being a representative or senator. He said, you're not really leading like you would as a governor or as a mayor. And, that's my background. And that was one of the things that drove me into considering a run for governor. To be the CEO of the state is a big deal. And so, again, the optimism was high, but it really set me up for where I am right now. And so here I am running for mayor of the city of Detroit, and it feels so good. And I'll tell you, I was just in another interview recently, and the host asked me, he said, it hasn't been a Republican mayor in Detroit since the 50s. Actually, it was 1956, the year I was born. He said, what do you say to folks that are watching, and we haven't had anyone elected to council a Republican, I said, well, let me start by saying this, and I'll say it to your viewers as well. First and foremost, the mayor's race is a nonpartisan race. Secondly, I'm a Detroiter who happens to be a Republican, but I'm first a Detroiter, and I represent and support Detroit. You know, I was also saying in an earlier interview that what I find so interesting, people shouldn't count me out because the signatures, and oh, by the way, I'm playing a very active role in getting signatures to get on the ballot for mayor. I am getting signatures, and I have some trusted people around me that are also getting signatures.
You're personally out there.
I'm personally. Now, I'm probably not as aggressive as some of the folks that are out there walking up to strangers. And I'll tell you what my strategy is. So people will come up, approach me, and they say one or two things. They say, you know, Chief, we miss you in the city. We wish you were back as our chief. Or, Chief, we miss you in the city. I'm going to support you for mayor. And so, of course, I got my petition with me, and I said, well, if you want to support me for mayor, then how about you sign my petition if you live
Right.
in the city of Detroit? And invariably, they say they live in the city of Detroit, and yes, I'd be honored to, sign your petition. And I'm not taking a poll because, again, this is nonpartisan, but I would venture to say that the majority of people signing my petition are Democrats who live in the city of Detroit. And so when people think a person who is a Republican cannot win, well, once again, I'm a Detroiter. I was born here in Detroit. And what's going to resonate most with people is the fact that a high approval rating during my tenure as chief. I remember Mike Duggan calling me into his office, Mayor Duggan, and I didn't know anything about approval ratings. Again, chiefs of police are appointed. They're not elected, unlike the
You got a
sheriff.
one-man approval rating. You need to be, on the right side of the mayor.
Exactly. But what he told me, it was some poll that was done, and he says, you have an approval rating up in the middle 70s. He then went on to say that politicians would crave to have numbers like that. So I kind of shucked it off. I mean, I was like, that's cool. I appreciate hearing that. I
Right.
work hard and the people know that I'm authentic. And I'm a public servant, not a politician. And I emphasize that even in this race. I am a public servant, not a politician. And I'm not saying politicians are all bad. Some, of course, have lost sight. But kind of digressing for a moment and going back in this whole Republican versus Democrat issue, I was a lifelong Democrat, a conservative Democrat, a JFK Democrat. My parents were Democrat.
Yeah.
But, James, what's interesting, because people think, well, I only got in the race for governor and then became a Republican. That's not true. I had been a Republican by that time. I think my transition really started towards the end of my time in Portland, Maine. It might have been Portland, Maine, where I first started noticing a shift.
So
Not so
what
much in
years are
me.
we talking?
So I left LA in 2009. I served as Portland's chief from 2009 to 2011, 2 years. And then the next 2 years, I served in Cincinnati as a chief from 2011 to 2013.
Were you a Tea Party guy? Is that what you're saying? That's about what lines up to those years in Portland. Remember the Tea Party movement, the taxed enough already, trying to shrink government?
Well, as I tell folk, I can't really speak to that, but I know that Portland, Maine was a Democrat city in terms of the electorate.
Right.
There were a lot of conservatives who lived in Portland, or I shouldn't say so much Portland, but certainly in Maine, because I met a lot of conservative. And so when I talk about my transition, and I say this as well, the Democrat Party left me, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And as the Democrat Party started moving more to left of center, I began moving right of center. And, many say if JFK was alive today, he'd be a Republican. Again, growing up in Detroit, church going, African Americans were very conservative. They just were. But at some point, the party start moving to the left. And so a lot of the Democrats who were centrist right down in the middle stayed silent when the small voices, the loud voices on the left
Right.
kind of took over.
Right.
And hence is what we have today. Because you ask folks, you said, why are you a Democrat? They don't know. I know because I was one. And the party was different then. I grew up a Democrat. My mom was a poll worker throughout my siblings' childhood, and she taught us the value of voting. But the other principle she taught was don't vote for party, vote for person. So in other words, take a view of the individual who wants to lead, whether it's a city, a state. And I tell you, I'm optimistic about this election. And I could care less that 1956 was the last time a Republican was elected mayor. That's not the factor. The factor is who is best to take on from Mike Duggan the great work that he started and keep the trajectory going up in Detroit. One person.
That's what I find fascinating, Chief, is that right now, you and Duggan are actually in the same boat in a lot of ways, where to get to your next opportunity, you have to tell the story of Detroit, and it needs to be a positive story. Maybe it's not all the way there, but it certainly needs to be positive. So in a lot of ways, you guys are reading from the same sheet of music. You have that similarity.
Right.
The other
And,
similarity is what you just said. Don't vote for party, vote for person. So you're a Republican affiliation in Detroit. He's running as an independent, as governor. You guys are both taking the road less traveled. Have you talked about that? Like, why do we insist on doing things the hard way, Mike?
Well, I haven't had that conversation with the mayor. I certainly have ideas. Maybe, and I haven't heard interviews when they've asked him, and you probably have knowledge of this, that, well, why did you shift? See, I'm clear on my shift.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I said Portland was a defining time, not only in my police career, but certainly politically. I got to tell this short story because it's actually a key point. So Portland, Maine, while it's a Democrat-run city, many of the people that live, the business owners there are very conservative. So in Portland, the chief of police approves concealed weapons permits. So I got a stack on my desk waiting for me. And so, like I was historically, look, again, I came out of Los Angeles.
Right.
A very gun unfriendly place for law abiding citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So I got this stack on my desk and I started denying them. I mean, I'm denying all of them. And so my staff comes running in, almost out of breath. Chief Craig, do you know where you are?
Right.
You're not in LA. In Maine, we love our guns. And so I looked up, I said, this is not Texas. I said, no, you're in Maine. We love our guns. And I said, have you ever thought about why violent crime is low? Not just in Portland, but in Maine. It was a Friday I had this conversation. And the person that was, trying to help me understand the philosophy went on to say, armed law-abiding citizens make a difference in reducing violence. Hit me like a brick.
You'd never thought about it that way.
Not initially, but you may remember a little tick for tack between myself as Detroit's police chief and President Obama. So I came out, I was on the cover, not once, but twice, cover of NRA magazine, as you probably recall.
Right.
And part of the interview, I made the statement, not once, but many times throughout my tenure, that I felt strongly that armed, law-abiding citizens can and do make a difference in reducing violence. And so the response by Obama, as I was told, was that's the most ridiculous thing he ever heard a major city chief say about armed citizens having guns and reducing violence. Well, not so fast, Mr. President. This is what I've come to learn. When I first got here to Detroit, a couple of things I found very odd. One, how desensitized the citizens were and police for the number of carjackings here in this city of Detroit.
Right.
That blew me away. I came in at July 2013, and then by the end of the year, there were over 800 carjackings. And so I am blown away by this. Even having spent the lion's share of my time in LA, in South LA, where the lion's share of violence happens,
Right.
you know, it's like I just was taken back about these carjackings. I mean, did carjackings happen in LA? Yes, but not to the degree that they happen in Detroit. It was just the oddest thing. But nobody seemed excited about it. But I was excited about it.
Because you had a personal experience. Didn't you say you were, I believe you were on Jefferson?
I was on Jefferson, and contrary to what some of the news reports, there was a car to my right, and I saw a young person exit the vehicle, and it was during darkness, and I was in a tinted up police car. He ran directly towards the passenger side and stopped traffic. So seeing him run up, I instinctively knew. Now, did I see a weapon? I did not. But I wasn't going to wait around. So what I did
You
is,
weren't waiting to see a weapon.
no, I wasn't waiting to see it, but I wasn't going to allow him to approach the side. It was a tinted up black Charger, and those cars are targets.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did is I made a quick U-turn, and contrary to some of the news reports, I ran from danger. I've run to danger. I've been a cop for 44 years. So I made a quick U-turn, and as I got behind the vehicle that the young person got out of, by this time he had re-entered the vehicle when I made the U-turn, and they took off and ran through a red light. Now, one, I didn't see a weapon. Two, I wasn't going to go on a high-speed vehicle pursuit in a plain, unmarked police vehicle. And yes, I had lights, but for me, the question would be, what are you pursuing? Well, I thought someone was attempting to maybe carjack me, but I couldn't definitively say it.
Right.
But I got out of harm's way. And
Because the news stories made it sound like you were the one who ran through the red light, like just trying to flee the danger.
No, I made a U-turn. I was in I was left a right to center lane. So I made a U-turn because I could. I wasn't like embedded between two lanes.
Right.
I made the U-turn and made an effort to get behind so I can get a plate.
Yeah.
Again, I saw no weapon. He didn't even make it to pull on the door of the car. I just made a U-turn. I took an evasive action. Now, if I had fired my weapon against an unarmed person who I thought, then I would have been strongly criticized, and as I should have been.
Absolutely.
But some certainly took that as a cowardly move, and I laugh about it every day. But the long and short, carjackings. Okay?
Yeah.
So we pulled the data, and predictably, most of the carjackings were happening during hours of darkness. Gas stations and liquor stores, primary, for obvious reasons. These are places where the opportunity was high. So I came up with an idea. As you know, the Green Light Detroit started very small, very basic, and we identified 8 gas stations that were clean, that ran a good business, because, you know, I came from that mindset of broken windows. When a place is dirty, it just draws in smaller crimes and sometimes larger crimes, you know, dimly lit, not a safe looking environment. And so we purposely selected locations that were pristine in terms of their appearance. One of the first locations I remember was on Wyoming and 6 Mile. And what ironic about that place, as a young man growing up in Detroit, probably in high school, and you remember when you used to pump gas and wash windshields off for patrons that would come up and get gas.
Yeah.
That's what I did for a while. But that ironically was the same gas station. And so that was the first green light.
Mm.
But then as Mike Duggan began to transition in his new role now as mayor of Detroit, we talked about the green light and we collaborated on how to take it to the next level. Because the other thing that I brought to the Detroit Police Department, which many didn't understand, was a real-time crime center. So to connect high definition cameras from these green light locations into our real-time crime center was mind-blowing.
And you see it on First
Nothing like
48.
it.
All kinds of cities have them now. New Orleans, and it's become a
Exactly.
thing.
But it
Yeah.
came from a dream I had. I tell folk, they said, "A dream?" I said, "I had a dream," because I was perplexed over these carjackings. And I said, "How can we harden a target and make these locations safe so when that nurse is getting off of work at 2 o'clock in the morning, they know,
Right.
hey, I'm going to this gas station because it's got a green blinking light, it's clean, it's well lit, and oh, by the way, it has a camera that's connected into police headquarters." And so I say that to say this. When my critics say, well, green light really doesn't work. Well, yes, it does. If we just look at data, and data is not the only metric. If you just look at data and you see that my last year in office, full year, our carjackings dropped around 200, a little less, and they're still low. That's because of green light. I know it. So then the critics will go on to ask, it says, well, Chief, you can't say it prevents crime. I said, but you can't tell me it doesn't. I said, the metric, that metric says it all. However, here's what you'll never know. And it goes in line, James, with what I said about armed, law abiding citizens, armed with weapons, can and do have an impact on reducing violence. So the other thing I found odd, in addition to carjackings, early in my tenure, when victims were confronted by a robbery suspect, they would disrobe the victims to the point to determine whether or not that victim is carrying a weapon. Disrobing. And I said, I have never. So they didn't go up and do a police style search. They would just make them take off a shirt, a jacket, and visually see that this person's not armed. And then they knew, but what about the victims who were potentially armed, or at least the suspect felt, you know?
Right.
So somebody who's looking at someone and say, I think he or she has a weapon, I would rob them, but I'm not going to. Now hold that thought for a minute. This is what gets people all discombobulated because they don't understand the concept. I cannot track, I cannot know, nor can any police practitioner know if somebody's going to rob somebody and they make a business decision not to do it. That incident is never reported. The
Right.
victim doesn't even know.
Right.
The crook knows because the crook had intents on robbing someone, but felt this may not be the best opportunity for me. Because
But
they
that's how police should think, is that I'd rather the crime not happen than it happen so as to be recorded.
and that's why I make
This is why I
statements.
never liked when police try to hide when they're trying to do traffic stops. No, if you actually want to control traffic, put a marked car in the median. Let everyone on the road see it from miles away. That's traffic control. If you'd rather
Absolutely.
people speed so you can catch them, then you're saying you'd rather the road be less safe, and that's not good policing.
That's a profound statement you just made. And here I'm a practitioner. Now I understand that. And I know heightened visibility of marked units. When I had some traffic concerns on Jefferson because on Jefferson, coming out of Grosse Pointe, driving behaviors change.
Mm,
Driving behaviors change. If you're on Jefferson on the other side of Alter, everybody is adhering to the speed limit because they know that the serving police officers are looking for the speeders.
right.
And sometimes they will park in a very distinctive way in the middle of a median and just sit there,
Mm-hmm.
just like Michigan State does strategically on highway. And we've done it in Detroit. And so you're right. Be visible because by being visible, and if there's an expectation that if you're speeding in Detroit, and the one thing I found also not as alarming as a carjacking, but just a blatant disregard for a red light traffic signal.
Oh, yeah.
Just go right through it. I've
Oh,
never
yeah.
seen that anywhere. But that was
I've seen police do that oftentimes in Detroit.
well, that's a problem. Now, if they're going to an emergency call and they go up to they should stop, look both ways, turn on their lights
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
siren, and then proceed cautiously. That's okay. But if you need to get a cup of coffee, you shouldn't be running a minute because you're not setting the appropriate example.
No.
And the community would call me and say, I just don't get it. But we change behaviors when we would and just be highly visible on Jefferson. And I said, if people just go mid-phase to a red light, zero tolerance. Speeders, zero tolerance. You look at what happens on our Lodge Freeway. That freeway is probably, and state police may not like me saying it, but I'm gonna say it anyway. How many weekends pass where you hear about just a tragic accident in the middle of the night on the Lodge Freeway? And I'm not saying just the Lodge; it happens on other freeway systems.
Lodge and Southfield Freeway are the ones I'm thinking
Right.
about.
And there's a tragic collision or collision resulting in tragedy. And the primary cause is what? Speed. Unregulated, and I remember, working with the state police. I said, we need more visible units out on the lodge during the midnight hours when these deadly accidents occur. And so like green light, and I'll close on that part because when my critics say, we don't know the green light works. Yes, it does work. I said, what we can't quantify or what we can't know, and I've seen looking through a real-time crime, I've seen people come up, individuals, point to the
Yeah.
green light sign
Yeah.
and just shake their head like this. Like
Right.
this was early green light. This is a no-go.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens? They decide to go to a place of opportunity where maybe there's no green light.
It's like locking your car door. Are there some people who would still bash in the window and steal your change? Yes, but there's a lot less of them than there are door pullers who are just
Right.
seeing if it's easy.
Right.
Chief, I know you got a ton of stuff to do. We've been trying to put the 2022 election to bed this week. Let me ask you this. When you think about it and you play the what if game, right? Had you made the primary, had you won the primary, I contend at this late date that when you look at who else was on the ballot, you had an incumbent governor, incumbent secretary of state, incumbent attorney general, all Democrats. You had those ballot measures. At least two of the three could be said to definitely drive Democrat turnout, maybe even all three. I contend that no one, John Engler, couldn't have beat Gretchen Whitmer in 2022. when you look at the totality of what was on that ballot? What say you?
I say it would have been a great fight. I was a threat. I mean, as you know, and I mentioned earlier in this broadcast that there were several polls that came out that showed me in almost a tie.
Yeah.
One that
Yeah.
comes to mind, I was sitting at 44, she was sitting at 46. Then there was a specific poll targeting independent voters, and I was ahead of her, 0.2 points. Could I have won that race? Absolutely. Now, that was a different time.
Yeah.
Now, I think the other contributing factor, and I've come to learn this since now entering in politics, just like the Democrat Party, when I talk about you got those on the far left, and then you got the more centrist Democrats. In the Republican Party, you got the establishment. They have another name for the establishment as well, but you got the establishment Republicans, like the John Englers, and then you have the populists. Some say Trump Republican. Trump is a populist, whether you like him or not.
Absolutely.
And I'm a populist candidate, and that's not a negative thing. Certainly someone who really values and cares about the people they're serving and understands I am working for the people. So I came to learn that because I was more of a populist, I probably ran afoul of some of the, traditional Republicans, and so I was more appealing, I think, by the masses because I was relatable. I'll never forget when I was running, and this was before the primary. And as you know, I had a commanding lead among the GOP, double digit lead, including Tudor, a massive lead over Tudor Dixon. And so what was interesting, it was a consistent, it was never like, well, he's leading now, he's not. And there was a couple of self-funded candidates in there that, frankly, were running ads. I never ran one ad on television as a governor candidate. Not one, which says a lot. But my point is,
Well, it still goes on to this day.
and it still goes on. And I would tell you, I think because I was a different kind of Republican, if you will, I think that was more appealing. Oh, this is the point I wanted to make. And I think it's a very good point. So my handlers or campaign strategists told me, says, you got to get through a primary. Don't even think about campaigning in Detroit or any of these other non-Republican places.
Hmm.
Just stay out of Detroit. And I looked at myself, are you kidding me? I said, first of all, I live in Detroit. Secondly, I was a police chief in Detroit for 8 years. So let me see if I understand this strategy. So stay out of Detroit. Okay, disappear. So I get through the primary. Now I'm the GOP candidate. Oh, it'd be okay for me to get back in Detroit. Let me
Right.
tell you what Detroiters would say and do. They would look at me and say, whoa, we haven't seen you at all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So now you come back begging for a vote. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Detroit's the one city where you can't do stuff like that.
you can't do it, but that was their strategy. I've talked to several GOP candidates, US representative candidates, Senate, and they say, what do I need to do about Detroit? I said, go there. Go there. It's that simple.
Mhm.
And I think this election cycle that just passed
Yeah.
says something. Things are changing. Look at African Americans in Chicago, the enclaves, West and South Side Chicago. What do they want to do? They would constantly say, in light of what was going on, the bad decisions that that mayor was making relative to people in our country illegally,
Mhm.
allowing them to sleep in police stations and giving them funding for housing, But yet you got a Chicago that doesn't feel they're getting proper representation.
Right.
It says, we're going to turn Chicago red. Now, of course, we didn't see that here in Detroit, but I don't care what city it is. I think more and more folks, Black or otherwise, who grew up Democrats are now open to hearing a vision and who are now open and saying, I like James Craig. I like what he did as police chief. So I say to them, nothing's changed. Look, I was a Republican the entire time I was the Detroit police chief and then later the deputy mayor. And I'm sorry because some of you think I hid it. I didn't hide it. Heck, I was on National Fox
All the time.
I was on the cover NRA magazine. Wait a minute. If it walks and quacks like a duck, is it a duck?
Did not do a great job of hiding it.
I didn't. And so
I'm not sure if undercover was ever your game, Chief, but
I did some undercover work. But the one thing that people in Detroit know, and James, I think you know this about me as well. First and foremost, those who go into political arenas and who are successful, those individuals are what? Authentic. And authenticity is not common. People will put their hand up, look at which way the wind is blowing.
Oh, yeah.
And will say and do. Conversely, with me, I don't always take the road often traveled. I'll go someplace else because people want to know the truth, even if it's bad. I don't run from it. And so people are sick and tired of politicians that look you in the face and say, the borders are not open. They're challenging, but the borders are not open. Mr. and Mrs. America, are we dumb?
Yeah.
Are we stupid? And so if there's any piece of advice, and I'm not saying all Democrats, because I'll say this, every single city I worked in, even after I transitioned in becoming a Republican, again, I was always a conservative. They were Democrat-run cities. Portland, Maine, Democrat-run.
Right.
Cincinnati, Ohio, Democrat-run. Detroit, Michigan, Democrat-run. We're all Detroiters. Who cares what your party affiliation is? Who cares? What about the person?
Absolutely. That's a perfect place to leave it. Chief, where can people learn more about your campaign?
And thanks for that question, but they can go to chiefcraigformayor.com, chiefcraigformayor.com. Please log in, sign up, volunteer, and make a nice donation. I'm very appreciative. And let's keep our city going forward.
Absolutely. Chief James Craig, it was a great conversation. We look forward to having you back, but it was so good to hear your voice and your vision.
Likewise, James. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to coming back.